Well, welcome back to our second installment in our In Defense of series. And tonight we will be looking at the Breslov sect, which is a very unique and uniquely vibrant and energetic group of Orthodox Jews. And they're probably the second most well-known Hasidic sect of Orthodox Jews behind the Chabad movement, which is who we looked at last time. And I've been wanting to do an episode or a lecture on the Breslov movement for quite a while. And I must confess that I'm less familiar with the sect than I am the Chabad movement. I've been following the Chabad movement for quite a while and have a deep respect for them, and it's not until probably the last year or so I've started to actively go out and find out more about this group. And I think it's very interesting, and I think a Nazarene Israelite should spend some time looking into these various Orthodox groups within Judaism and really trying to find what makes them tick, and do that for the reasons of seeing how we should be as Nazarenes and how that aligns with Messiah, and it really gives us an opportunity to see elements of how Yeshua, the type of man he was, and the things he wanted from people, and the way he went about imparting his knowledge of Torah, and really doing one of the most difficult tasks known to a human being ever to walk the face of the earth, and to do it in such a short space of time. And he never seems to be rushed in his ministry. He never seems to really find that he's falling behind, or that he's going quickly because he's got a limited amount of time. He seems to be going from point A to point B. He just never feels rushed, and just the way he conducts himself, there's elements of that across the board in various ultra-Orthodox Jewish sects. And I think by looking at various elements, as we're going to get into tonight with the Breslovs, we get a fresh look at Messiah, and that's the whole point of what we're doing. This isn't just a series on looking, a documentary on the, or a short lecture on these various groups, but there's a purpose behind what I want to try and do, and that is to get fresh insight into Messiah. And I believe we can do it by looking at these groups. Even though Orthodox Jews today officially reject Yeshua as their Messiah, they still carry a lot of elements in the way they observe Torah, and their outlook and their mindset aligns so much, ironically, with Yeshua himself. And what's really interesting, and this is something I was thinking about just in the last 24 hours, and it's that when there's certain elements of the Chabad movement and the Breslov movement and various other groups, and these elements that are usually the elements that are the venerable ones, all these elements should be featured in somebody who's walking out a Nazarene walk, and that is being a Nazarene Israelite, being somebody who is of the sect of the Nazarenes. And you find that these features that you see in these groups that are very much grounded in the Torah, these are indeed features that you find in Yeshua. And if he came back tomorrow, if he came back tomorrow, he would find himself most comfortable residing within these various groups, for various reasons. On the surface being that they do keep kosher, they do have a fundamental element of Torah in their core daily routine that aligns with Yeshua being an Orthodox Jew, Second Temple era Orthodox Jewish man that he was. Not formally being trained in the well-known yeshivas, but really just sort of beginning to have a groundswell of notoriety, then with his incident in the Jordan with Jochen, the immerser, just beginning word began to to circulate, and this kind of momentum began to build around his ministry quite quickly. And then he began to increase in the miracles that he was doing, which added to the weight of his ministry. And this is what Judaism teaches, not that they don't reject miracles, but they reject miracles on their own for validation of ministry. But if the miracles are also in accordance with the truth being practiced and being taught by whoever's doing the miracles, then these miracles do carry great weight in credibility of who the individual is. And we see this with the Baal Shem Tov, the Master of the Good Name, in the Chabad tradition, and various other key figures, even Rabbi Akiva, doing miraculous things, even as recent as Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson of blessed memory, just being able to do things that just defy any explanation, any natural explanation. And these things aren't, as Rabbi Nachman of the Breslov movement taught, every single individual has the potential to be great. Being great in the Torah and having a strong relationship and a strong emunah, strong faith, this is not just the domain of those who are deeply enmeshed with a deep intellect, but it can be for the most simplest person to achieve these high levels, and they're available to everybody no matter what their background, what their intellect. One just has to have a desire and a drive to want to actually progress and move forward in their faith. So that's the kind of air I want to have about this series that I want to do as we look at each of these particular sects, and from here see how we go. I want to also have a look at Rabbi Akiva, so I want to look at various key individuals as well, and I'm thinking of doing one in defense of Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva tends to get a lot of bad press within the Nazarene community and the wider Messianic community because of putting his support behind Bar Kokhba in the Bar Kokhba revolt, and that having disastrous results, and unfortunately he's seen as a somewhat negative by many Messianics in that he followed a false Messiah. And there's also some criticism that's been leveled at his absence from his wife for such long periods of time during his relationship with his wife and things like that, which I want to totally address and get into. And believe it or not, in doing that, we're going to find more insights into Messiah and into the Nazarene writings and things like that as well. And we are going to do that tonight with looking at the Breslovs. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, get yourself a tea or whatever, and sit down, and we'll get into this movement and find out what makes it tick. What are the controversies, and are some of these controversies, do they have any grounding? So we'll look at some of the controversy as well. But I want to make it clear that this series isn't running any of these movements down. We're just trying to find out what makes them tick and what are the elements out of them that are positive that we can take home. Okay, so as I said, the Breslov movement's one of the most energetic and vibrant groups out there. It's when I was in Israel in 2008, and these aren't photos from when I was in Israel, these are just photos I got off the web. I remember seeing like a white van sort of pull up with these speakers on the roof and music blaring, and sort of Hebrew writing sort of graffitied along the side wall of the van. And I thought to myself, who are these guys? So back in 2008, I wasn't really hip to who these guys were, and I didn't know that the music that was playing was called Na Nach tunes, and which is Breslov music, which actually is taking Israel by storm. Breslov music's actually very, very popular in Israel, and you can find it. There's Breslov music that's trance music. There's Breslov music that's dance, pop, even punk. There's even punk Breslov or Na Nach tunes, and most Israelis know one or two Breslov songs, so they're very influential. And so the real core of the movement, which was, as I said, founded by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who we're going to look at. But the idea, here they are on the van, they're dancing around on the side of roads and stuff. But the idea is and Rabbi Nachman actually voiced this once, is that if it should be every believer's goal to try and go for 8 days being continually happy, and it's actually quite difficult to go 8 straight days being happy, and choosing to be happy and choosing to have joy, choosing to have simcha. And so the real core drive behind these followers of Nachman, who's since passed away many years ago, is to just have this constant pine for this constant joy and look to be happy, look to be joyful. And I see within the Nazarene movement, there's a lot of people that are actually walking out the faith and they're not happy. They're not happy. They're carrying grudges. They're carrying they're feeling jealous. There's jealousy. There's all sorts of terrible traits emerging. There's ones that continue to court controversy, and they constantly find themselves embroiled in arguments about calendar and dates and things like that, and to the point where a good friend of mine, actually a couple that live up the coast, I remember seeing them at an international speaker came to speak, and they were at this event, and I see them every year, and they turn up, and they just seem to always have a bee in their bonnet. They don't seem to be happy. They seem to be restless. They just don't seem to be walking out the faith in a way that gives them pleasure. And I remember taking the lady aside, and I know this couple quite well, and I just said to her, I said, "Are you happy with this faith? Are you happy with walking it out? Because when I look at you, I find that you're frustrated." And she looked back at me in sort of a defensive sort of manner and tone and said, "I just want to serve Yahweh." And that's a great answer. But is serving Yahweh making you happy, or is it making you angry? Is it making you depressed? Is it making you feel alone? And you do feel these emotions in this walk, because we're so few and far between. The movement's still very much in its early days and learning to walk, and we're all sort of trying to find our feet. But I don't believe that it's a walk that should make you feel depressed or feel detached or despondent from humanity, but rather you should feel exactly the opposite and feel really privileged that you've been plucked out of the sea of humanity, 1 from every city, 2 from every family, as it says, and you've been brought in and brought close to the bosom of the Father. And so this current world, this temporal world, is passing away. And it's a dreamlike state that we're in, no matter how real it might feel, or smell, or see, or whatever, however real this environment feels. It's just a precursor to the real reality which is to come. And the real value of this current age is to glean as many treasures and accrue as many treasures as we can for the Olam Haba, for the world to come. So it is a very important time to be alive on this side of the veil, but its core value is to retain that yirat Yahweh, that fear of Hashem, that fear of heaven, fear of Shema, yirat Shemayim. And if we can retain that fear of the Almighty, that reverential respect, and to keep us on the straight and narrow, or if we fall off the wagon, that we get back on it very quickly, and we dust ourselves off, and we live the abundant life. And this is one of the core values within the Breslov community, and I believe that's why the Breslov community, even though its founder, Rabbi Nachman, who died, 100 or so years ago, he never appointed a successor, and they're known within the Jewish community as being the dead pious ones, dead Hasudim, in that they follow a deceased leader who hasn't appointed any successor, and yet the movement's just still seeming to grow and gain and expand in its reach, and growing, getting more and more converts to its group year after year. And it's a very loose movement. It's not a movement that's bound up by strict joining rituals or things like that. There's no, I believe there's no official list of members within the Breslov movement. So it's a very fluid thing. And in fact, the best way to describe the Breslovs is if you're sort of familiar with the hippie era. They're kind of like, it's kind of like a hippie sort of form of Judaism, but it's not like a shortcut like Reform Judaism is, and like other forms of Judaism that preach that some Torah has been done away with, or the Torah is not entirely applicable for today. Conservative Judaism, things like that. And it's not like that. It's not a shortcut to Torah. It's something that they still do their daily prayers. Pray 3 times a day. There's this emphasis on deep, intensive Torah study, and there's other emphases in the group which we're going to look at as I go on, and we look at the various aspects of it this evening. But I guess the best place to start is with Rabbi Nachman himself, and I have a bit of a slide here which has a little bit of detail about him, and I think that's the only image I was able to actually find off the web, but I'm pretty sure that's him. And he was born in 1772, and he lived until 1811. And he grew up in a city in Ukraine, which I think is now Poland. And at one point in his life, he moved around quite a bit. He only lived to about age 39, 38, 39. And he was married several times. And he had 2 boys, but they died in infancy. And he had 3 or 4 daughters. I can't really remember if it's 3 or 4 daughters, and who they survived and they went on. And at one point in his sort of latter part of his life, he went to Israel. He went to the Holy Land, and he only took some of his disciples with him. And he went there incognito, and so he went in disguise. And he was quite controversial. I'm gonna share with you some things, but I don't think these controversial things about him were anything to be alarmed by. Rather, they just showed a unique creativity. Now, just strictly speaking, with Nachman himself, he was the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. So he was of a man of fairly impeccable pedigree. What have I got here? Rabbi Nachman's mother, Feiga, was the daughter of the Baal Shem Tov's daughter, Yudel, while his father, Rabbi Simcha, was the son of Rabbi Nachman Horodenka, one of the Baal Shem Tov's closest disciples. And so Nachman gathered around him a small number of chosen disciples, one of whom recorded his life and teachings. Nachman undertook hazardous journeys to the land of Israel in 1798 or 1799. A year or two after his return, he settled in Breslov, a town called Breslov, where he remained until 1810. And the last years of his life were spent in a town called Uman in the Ukraine, now Poland, where he died of tuberculosis at age 39. Okay, so, and as I said, Breslov is known by its critics as Totei Chasudim, which means the dead Chasudim, because Nachman promised his followers that he would be with them even after his death. So no successor to him was ever appointed. So negating this, need to appoint a successor. And so Rabbi Nachman's followers call him the Rebbe, or Rebbe Nachman, which Rebbe means beloved rabbi, beloved master teacher. One of the unique things about Rabbi Nachman, which sets him apart from a lot of the other rabbis and sages of the last couple of centuries and beyond, was that though he did write a lot of discourse commentating on the Torah and various aspects of halakha, like most good sages or rabbis did or do, he did one thing that actually made him quite a standout, was that he wrote a lot of original stories, fictional stories, and the stories were very strange. They were kind of like adult fairy tales, and they often contained elements of realism and the fantastic. And believe it or not, famous Jewish German author Franz Kafka, who was a guy who was had a lot of problems. He wrote quite astounding novels dealing with isolation and madness, and various sort of very deep and heavy topics. And believe it or not, he was very influenced by Rabbi Nachman's writings. And some of Nachman's writings, he never put it really any explanation of what they were about, but they were quite bizarre. In fact, there was one that I just read just tonight. It was a very short one about two men who were the leader of a town, and the wheat in the town was all infected and would make all the occupants of the town insane. And so they had some wheat that wasn't infected, and they decided that they wouldn't eat the wheat that wasn't infected because then they would seem crazy to the rest of the town. And so what they did was they decided to partake of the wheat that had the infection that caused everyone to be mad, and they would be mad along with the members of the town, but they would put a mark on their foreheads, and when they looked at each other, they would remember that they were insane. It's really bizarre. And there's another one where, and I think Henry Abramson, who does a really good lecture on Rabbi Nachman, which is on YouTube, which I recommend that you get. And some of the things I'll share probably overlap with him, but this guy's great. My lecture in comparison is very lay compared to his. But Nachman wrote another story about a king whose son is descended into madness, and a lot of Nachman's original fictional stories centered on madness, and his son would be found under the table naked, eating pieces of corn. And so he called for this rabbi to come and help his son and bring his son out of this madness. And he says, "Where's your son?" He says, "He's under the table, naked, eating corn." And so the rabbi disrobed and got under the table with him, his son, the prince, naked, and began to eat the heads of corn on the ground with his son. And his son said to the rabbi, "Why are you doing this?" That's right, because the son thought he was a chicken, and he said, "Because I'm a chicken." And so the rabbi says, "I'm a chicken," and he started eating the grain of corn with the prince, with the mad prince. And then the rabbi called for one of his attendants to bring him his pants, and he put his pants on, and the prince said, "Why are you putting pants on?" He says, "Are you kidding? Chickens can wear pants." And so the prince then wanted to wear pants, and then he called for his attendants to put on his tunic. And the mad prince, the son of the king, said, "Why are you putting on a tunic?" And he said, "Are you kidding? Chickens can wear tunics." And so the mad prince's son put on a tunic. And then finally, it's a story that's sort of tiered with elements of the rabbi slowly becoming more human and not being less chicken, but assuring the prince that he could still be a chicken but still wear clothes. And then he sat upright at the table and he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Are you kidding? Chickens can sit upright at the table if they want." And so finally, at the end of it, the prince's son was cured, and he acted like a normal human being. And there's a lot of type of commentary that's been written around and interpreted the story. And if you go and have a look at Henry Abramson's lecture, he'll give you a little bit more detailed explanation of that sort of information. But these are the type of stories that Rabbi Nachman wrote, and they're just really fascinating. If you start reading them, you'll find you'll want to read more and more and more, because they offer a lot of they're open to a lot of personal interpretation, but they can give you a lot of insight into various methodologies and particularly the story with the rabbi being under the table naked with the insane prince. It's sort of like him going down to the prince's level and sort of bringing out the prince from his level stage by stage. And I think this guy was a genius. This Rav Nachman, he was like just absolutely genius in his approach to Judaism and Torah. Very, very unique. The name Breslov comes from the town of Breslov, which is located in Ukraine, where Nachman spent most of his last 8 years of his life. He was actually born in Medzibozh, which is eastern Poland. Breslov is sometimes translated as Bratslav or Braklav, and should not be confused with Bratislava in Czechoslovakia, or Breslov, which is in Germany. Breslov is situated on the river Bug, midway between Nemirov and Tolkien, in what was the government of Podolia. It was usually for the Hasidic groups of Eastern Europe to take their name from the name of the town where their leader, the Rabbi, lived, and in most cases they have retained their original name, even if most of all the other groups, including the Rabbi, have relocated. When Rabbi Nachman first settled in Breslov in 1802, he said that his followers would always be known as Breslov Hasidim. So this is so today, even though Breslov is now a worldwide movement, and there are no known Breslov Hasidim in the town of Breslov itself, which is interesting. The name Breslov is more than merely a typographical significance. Now, this is really interesting when we look at the name Breslov, and I've got a slide up here. Wait until you see this. And Rabbi Nachman once said that Breslov has the same letters as the Hebrew words lev and basar, and lev is heart, and basar is the heart of flesh, is basically flesh. So the actual name Breslov shares the same phonetic pronunciation as the Hebrew word for heart of flesh, and every Jew should have, or every believer in Torah should have, as expressed in Ezekiel 36:26, which I've got up there on the slide. It says, "I will take away your heart of stone and I'll give you a heart of flesh." So that's really amazing. And if you have a look at Ashkenazi Hebrew, which instead of the t sound, you have the s sound in a lot of Hebrew words, it has the sound brislev, and bris or brit is covenant, and lev again is heart. And so Breslov approach places great stress on serving Hashem with joy and living life as intensely as possible. Rabbi Nachman taught that it's a great mitzvah always to be happy, and so this is this emphasis on having a joy that flows out from the heart, this heart of flesh. So that really amazes me. How this begins to kind of give us a little bit of an insight into the Torah being written on our hearts and us circumcising our hearts. This Brit, this covenant, interchange. See, the word Brit is interchangeably used with the word circumcision, and so covenant and circumcision they're used interchangeably with Brit. It's interesting because the term British is covenant and Ish is man. So the nation Britain, filled with people who are British, people are covenantal people, which is very much a sort of a giveaway that Britain's early origins could have originated from wandering lost tribes of Israel, which is really interesting. Excuse me while I have a quick drink. So that's really, really cool. Now another interesting feature, which is really dominates the Breslov ideology, and that's this concept of Hitbodedut, which is it's a Hebrew word that means meditation. And so Rabbi Nachman he placed a lot of emphasis on this concept of self-reflection, self-analysis, and that's essentially what this type of meditation is, and it's a form of free-flowing prayer, and it's to be done on a regular basis. Just have a quick look at my notes here; they're sliding across here on me. It's to be done in addition to regular prayer, praying 3 times a day, and so the baseline of a Breslov is that they would at least try to find an hour a day to get away and do Hitbodedut, which is free form conversational prayer with the Almighty, and Nachman taught that you go away and you talk to yourself. You talk to Hashem, you talk to your past, you talk to your future, and you just go away to somewhere secluded, preferably somewhere that is an area, an outdoor area, an open area which has greenery and has grass and trees and things like that. Just nature. Be out there with nature and pour your heart out to the Almighty. In some cases, you don't even have to make any sense. You can just scream and wail. You can cry. You can laugh. You can jump around. And it's just really allows a person to just personally really begin to try and find out who they are by talking to yourself and talking to the Almighty in ways and just really delving into subjects in an audible way without fear of being judged or overheard or anything like that, and really nut out a lot of things that are really hard to shake out of us. And so this is interesting because we see this same type of behavior in Yeshua with how he conducted himself, and he would often be found going away to places and finding places of solitude. In fact, it says in the word that Yeshua often withdrew to lonely places and he prayed. In Luke 5:16, it talks about how he would go and to solitary places and just be with Yahweh. It says here, Rabbi Nachman stressed the importance of soul searching. He always maintained that his high spiritual level was due to his own efforts and not to his famous lineage or any circumstances of his birth. He repeatedly insisted that all Jews could reach the same level as he, and spoke out very strongly against those who thought that the main reason for the Zaddik's greatness was the superior level of his soul. And this is what I was getting at earlier on in the introduction. Everyone can attain the highest level, Nachman taught. It depends on nothing but your own free choice, for everything depends on a multitude of deeds. Now, this is in no way going down the line of works, but this is rather looking at the value of effort that one puts in and pours into his faith. And there's really no faith without works. If one's able to produce works, why wouldn't one do works if one's faith isn't strong? Works are rather a byproduct of faith. They're not something that is compartmentalized away from faith. They're just a byproduct of it. When you put cold water in a glass, condensation will naturally appear on the outside of the glass. It's just a byproduct of there being cold water being poured in a glass, and works is the same when it's applied to, when you look at it in light of emunah. And what the result of emunah is naturally works, and hard work, hard laborious work, avodot, this service, lavadot shabalev, which is service of the heart, not service of the mind, service of the intellect. It's service of the heart. It's an emotional service. So we've got to align our emotional center with the Torah, and so that's what you can have all the Torah knowledge in the world that you like, but if your heart's not engaged, you'll still be finding that you're tripping into sin, you're delving into sin, or you're just falling into sin, and because there's that your emotional center hasn't actually attached itself to your intellectual center yet, and it takes work and effort to do that. And this is what Rabbi Nachman was talking about. And so our Messiah would often go away and find places of solitude to pray. So we see that that's a very big part of his ministry. And even towards the end of his ministry, near his time of his crucifixion, he even went away on his own, a little way away from his disciples. We also have an incident in Genesis 24 and 63 with Yitzhak, one of the patriarchs, the son of Abraham, the miracle child, and it says in Genesis 24 and 63, and Yitzhak went out to Suach, that is to meditate in the field at the eventide in the afternoon, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming. This is when Abraham's servant was bringing his wife Rebecca, and she ends up falling off a camel, seeing this man, and it wasn't his beauty that caused her to stumble from the camel, but it was the fact that there was something going on in his conduct in the field, and it was this Hitbodedut, this suach that was happening. And it's interesting because the Another word for meditation in Hebrew, which is suak, shares the same root as a word for shrub in Hebrew, which is siach. Thus, when plants of the field begin to return to life and grow, they all yearn to be included in one suak, in meditation and prayer, according to one of the Talmudic tractates there, which is really interesting. So Hitbodedut can take a few minutes to many days. So somebody can spend, technically speaking, somebody can spend a minute in Hitbodedut in their room privately with the door closed. And Messiah says that. He says, take yourself into your room and close the door and pray in secret. And then the Heavenly Father who sees what you do in secret will reward you in the open. It can be done in any language. It's best done in complete seclusion where there is no other soul. And also, too, if you're doing it at night, most other people in your area are asleep. So while the rest of the people in your immediate vicinity, in your location, in your region are actually sleeping and are symbolizing being dead, you're awake and you're communing with the Almighty while all those around you are dead. And so that's why there's great emphasis and great power in praying after dark, and particularly as it gets closer to midnight and the darkest hours, which are before the dawn. It's very, very advantageous to pray at that time. There's just so much symbolism that's enmeshed in that. Matthew 6:6. So here's the verse. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Matthew 6:6. Psalms also frequently refer to meditation as well. Psalm 1:1 and 2. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, who meditates on the word frequently. Let me just get it here. Because there's various translations that you have to be careful to make sure that you've got a pretty good translation. If you can get a Jewish translation, that's probably a good way to start. Verse 2. But his desire is in the Torah of Yahweh, and in his Torah he meditates day and night. So there's constant reference to meditation there. Psalm 39:3, Psalm 48:8, Psalm 77:12, and Psalm 104:34 also directly mention meditation. So that's one of the other features of Rabbi Nachman and the Breslovs, is this emphasis on isolating oneself and just taking yourself away from the rat race, and just settling down with the Almighty and saying, listen, Heavenly Father, I want to have a chat with you. And it might be difficult to do it first, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. You might go out there and you say, well, listen, even before you go out there, say, well, I don't know, I don't know what I would say, but I think Rav Dror, one of the very prominent Breslov rabbis on YouTube that people see quite frequently. He's a very, very good teacher. He says that you don't worry about what you're going to say. The words are out in the field waiting for you. Get there to be there with them, and when you get there, the words will come. It's just beautiful the way he describes the desire. After listening to one of his lectures, you just want to run away and do Hitbodedut for hours on end. It's just so inspiring to see somebody so enthusiastic, so knowledgeable, and just have such a heart for people that's just so obvious in all of his lectures. Very funny man too. Very, very interesting man. Rav Dror Costacado, I think his last name is. I can't remember. But yeah, just go onto my Facebook feed and scroll down. You'll eventually come to one of his lectures, which I've ended up sharing probably not too long ago. Usually share his lectures every so often. Okay, so another feature of Rav Nachman and the Breslov movement is this distinctive feature is Nachman's tikkunim. Tikkun or tikkunim, plural. Tikkun is repair, tikkunim repairs. And this is formulas of self-repair. When a person makes the time and effort to repair himself, then the Almighty will come and help him repair. And so most of these tikkunim, they center around specific recitations of orders of Tehillim. And in rabbinic literature, this is known as Shimoshai Tehillim or Shimoshai Torah, which means practical use of the Psalms or practical use of the Torah. And it's a way of actually being able to siphon certain orders of recitations of whether it be paragraphs or sentences or even words of Torah in certain sequence to actually bring about some form level of repair of something that's very narrow or something that's very difficult. When there's something falls down a crack, it's very hard to get it out of that narrow crack. And the more powerful the Tikkun, the more ability it has to get down into all the deep ravines and crevices and narrow parts of a person that have things that are really hard to get out. And so one of the things that Nachman was very famous for was his probably his most well-known tikkun is Tikkun Klali, which means the general repair. And it's made up of Psalm 16, Psalm 32, Psalm 41, Psalm 42, Psalm 59, Psalm 77, Psalm 99, Psalm 105, Psalm 137, and Psalm 150, the last psalm there of David's Tehillah. So Tehillim. So that's and this is these psalms. This part of this aspect of his tikkun centers around repairing the Brit, restoring the Brit. Now the Brit is often interchangeably, as I said, used with circumcision, and in Genesis 17:9 it says, and you shall guard my Brit, you shall guard my covenant or circumcision, and your descendants after you for all the generations. And so this became one of the standout things in Nachman's studies, was this concept of guarding one's Brit, or guarding because when the Heavenly Father made the covenant with Abraham via the circumcision, it was a very holy act, and that's a very important part of the male anatomy, the reproductive organ. And by removing the orla, the obstruction, the outer layer, the foreskin, you heighten the member's sensitivity, and that's symbolized by having the sensitivity in our hearts also heightened. But it's very important that we guard our Brits, we guard that part of our anatomy, and we don't misuse it in any way. And this was the whole idea of Tikkun Klali, that was mainly centered about restoring misuse of that part of the body, which is very rampant today, not just in secular circles, but in religious circles as well. Men are finding it terribly difficult to maintain propriety in that area, and in this day and age, Rabbi Nachman's teachings, particularly setting on his tikkunim, very important and very worthwhile a person studying and getting into, to being able to find out how they can restore themselves, repair themselves, and cleanse themselves after committing what's called a flaw in the covenant, or flaw in the Brit, a flaw in the circumcision. And this it's Tikkun HaBrit, and that's the restoration of the flaw of the circumcision that a person has committed when they misuse that organ. The prophet Yeshayahu, Isaiah 60:20 says, "And your people are all Zadokim righteous." The Zohar asks, how is it possible to say that all the Jews are Zadokim when we see some are not, and then answers that they belong to the category of the Zadokim, the righteous ones, because they are circumcised and they circumcise their children. And then in Likutei Maharan, Torah 23, Rav Nachman says that the Jews are all Zadokim because of the Brit, and Rabbi Natan says that the Rebbe told him that this means because they are circumcised. But this Brit, this covenant between Jew and his Creator, does not end with circumcision. In the same Likutei Moharan, Rabbi Nachman also says that every Jew who guards his Brit is considered a Zadic relative to another Jew who is not at the same level when it comes to guarding his Brit. Circumcision is the first step in bringing a Jewish man into the category of Zadic, and without that mitzvah he cannot relate to the truly great Zadokim, the righteous ones. He must continue to guard and sanctify the mark of circumcision by avoiding misuse of the part of his body at which time of his Brit was dedicated to purity and sanctity. Wow. But if he does misuse it, Rav Nachman declared that one can completely rectify this sin, that is, the sin of seminal emission outside the confines of marriage, If after repenting he goes to a mikveh and then recites 10 particular tehillim, which is, as I said, 16, 32, 41, 42, 49, 77, 90, 105, 137, 150, to rectify the damage of that transgression. Now, be very careful, those of you that are watching this and going, right, I'm going to start to bring in recitation of Tikkun Klali into my prayers. Be very careful not to get into the pattern of reciting it and then going and committing the sin again and then reciting it afterwards and continually doing that and thinking that you're okay. The idea is that you cease committing that act, and this is something that you do as part of the rectification of falling into the desire to do that act. By continuing to do the act and then adding this recitation as part of maybe something that subdues your conscience, this is not really the intention of this tikkun. The idea of a tikkun, it has to be accompanied with a desire to cease doing the act, and a person implementing realistic means and terms and measures to avoid falling into the temptation of committing that act in the future. So be very careful not to just go, okay, well, I'm just going to pray this now and then it's going to be all magical and everything's going to be fixed. No, that on its own, no, it's got to be also accompanied with the intention and a real desire in one's heart to be sanctified. And of course, if one can immerse in a mikveh, in a body of water, and have a ritual purification, that is also just as important as the recitation of this tehillim. And one of the other things I want to add too is Rabbi Mordecai, is it Rabbi Mordecai? No, Rabbi Mizrahi has about an 11-minute lecture, 11-minute video on YouTube where he discusses the Breslov movements, and he's very negative towards the Breslovs, and he speaks about Tikkun Klali, and he says that, you know, there are other recitations of Tehillim that are as set apart as that. He doesn't really say that that's worthless. In fact, if you listen to his criticism, which sounds pretty harsh against the Breslovs, he doesn't actually criticize Nachman. You've got to listen very carefully, but he's not actually criticizing Nachman himself, but rather he's placing a lot of criticism towards some of the followers that may have jumped onto the Breslov bandwagon in the ensuing years. And every movement, every group has its share of people who are fakers or people who are a bit out there and a bit silly. So, you know, we shouldn't really just point out the wacky people or the people that are just not very aren't doing the right thing. They're attaching themselves to any particular faith and then paint that entire faith with that tar with the same brush, so to speak. But yeah, so there are other recitations of the Psalms that are more popular. There's the Silikot prayers, recitation of certain chapters of Tehillim around the Rosh Hashanah and things like that. Speaking of Rosh Hashanah, one of the things Nachman said before he died is that if anybody would come to his graveside on Rosh Hashanah and recite Tikkun Klali, then he would, if he could, he would pull them out of Gehenna, or literally pull them out of hell by their peyot, by their earlocks. And this is why a lot of people in the Breslov movement have the actual really big earlocks, is because there's this story that Rav Nachman said that he'll pull them out of hell. Should they be deemed to be going to hell, he'll pull them out of hell by their earlocks. And so it's a custom that a lot of Breslovs have the very long peyots. And this was one of Mizrahi's criticisms. He said that that Nachman said that he would pull them out of hell, his followers out of hell. Yet Moshe Rabbeinu, he wouldn't have even been so bold to say anything like that, which is a true statement from Mizrahi. But rather, I think the emphasis that Nachman placed when he made that statement was that if he could, he would do it, not that he would guarantee that he would do it. So it's not him being, listen, I'm such a righteous man, I will pull you out of hell if you do these things that I tell you to do. He didn't really sort of say it like that. But some people have misinterpreted it like that, and Mizrahi kind of walks the line a little bit on that when he does mention the movement. But if you listen very carefully, because he's a smart man, he doesn't really attack Nachman so much. There is a a criticism in Nachman's during his life. He moved in and he set up shop in a territory where there was already a rabbi, and he moved there without the rabbi's permission, which is not really a good thing. And if that was the case, yeah, that's a little bit of a criticism that holds water. But nobody's perfect. Nobody's squeaky clean. There are also accusations that he believed himself to be Mashiach, which is unfounded as well. Many great leaders within various Hasidic movements have been mistaken to be Mashiach, and he, as far as I can tell, and you've got to be very careful about reading any of his writings, because a lot of his disciples actually wrote a lot of his material, and he actually instructed that a lot of his material actually be destroyed before he died, because he felt that his getting tuberculosis had something to do with him actually writing down things that were too sacred and should have been destroyed. And so he gave instructions for a lot of his writings to be destroyed. And so a lot of the writings we have today, there are some writings that he wrote, but a lot of them were from his disciples and even followers that came a few years after he died. Another thing that I'll mention about the Breslov movement is the Na Nachman Nachman Mehuman, which is the subject of the song that I had playing before this lecture started. And that is the concept of a particular note that was addressed to him, addressed to a Breslov Rabbi Yisrael Be-Odesser in 1922. He allegedly found a letter in his library that was written by Rabbi Nachman after he died in 1810. That was a note that had come down from heaven, that was a note to give comfort to his followers, his disciples. And the seventh line of this petich, this note, is signed Na Nach, Nachman Mauman, which became Rabbi Odesser's personal meditation and song. So he would meditate Na Nachman Mauman, which is what the lyrics were in the song, this popular Breslov song that I had at the beginning of the lecture. Before he died, he taught this phrase to a group of devotees who formed the Na Nach movement, and they believe it was a letter from heaven. The paper, written in Hebrew with one line in Yiddish, reads as follows. Okay, this is what it reads. This is what it says. It's very difficult for me. This is what the letter that allegedly was written by the angelic hand of Nachman, who had passed away, and he allowed this letter to go down and find itself within the pages of one of these books in a rabbi's library. Here's what the letter says. It was very difficult for me to come down to you, my precious student, to tell you that I had pleasure very much from your devotion, and upon you I said, my fire will burn until Messiah is coming. Be strong and courageous in your devotion. Na Nach Nachman Meoman. Now, Meoman is a double entende, which means that it's Rabbi Nachman from Uman, which is where he finally settled in the latter part of his ministry, and it's also his burial place, and it's also believed to, and it can also mean believed or credited. So Meoman can also mean accredited or believed. So it means a few things. It's like Breslov. It can mean heart and flesh, and circumcision of the heart and things like that. And the letter goes on, and with this I'll reveal to you a secret, and it is full and heaped up from one extreme to another, and with the strengthening of your devotion you will understand it, and a sign, the 17th of Tammuz, which is coming up soon, the 17th of Tammuz, they will say that you don't fast. Which is interesting, because that's one of the criticisms that Yeshua was cited, that his disciples don't fast. And their explanation was, we don't fast is because we have Messiah with us now. And there'll be plenty of times for us to fast when he's not with us. And so that's pretty much all I have on the Breslov movement. But that's a pretty good place to start. That's nearly an hour's worth of information there. And anybody who's looking to finding more about this movement, there's plenty more information out there. As I usually do, I've only just scratched the surface, but hopefully it's sparked your interest. and that you might do a little bit of your own research into this group, and in doing so, find a few little things that actually align with Messiah's nature and mindset and how he conducted himself. And yeah, hopefully we can look at maybe getting into looking at a bit about Rabbi Akiva next time round. Thank you very much for watching the video. Please like it if you liked it at all. If there's anything in it that you found was informative or encouraging to you in your walk. And please subscribe to Netzarim Antoecie, Nazarenes of Australia on YouTube. And onward and upward. Bye now.